Honorable Member for St. James North.
I thank you, Honorable Chairman. I first wish to commend this minister and his technocrats for the tremendous job they've been doing in trying to fulfill their strategic goals, which the ministry has as its primary focus to alleviate or eradicate intergenerational poverty in the short and medium term, and the elimination of poverty in the long term, thereby contributing to the overall socio-economic development of Barbados. And this has to be one of the primary goals of any government, to try to eliminate this intergenerational poverty that the vast majority of our people, those who are Black descendants of slaves, found ourselves in from pre-colonial times. I wish to speak towards the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, his challenge to honorable members, and to say that a few months ago, in fact, they had a video circulating by someone who was a self-confessed and professed agent of the political party of which he now finds himself as political leader, over a constituent of mine that I found was extremely deplorable and despicable. And I would trust that he would use his office now as the political leader of that political party to condemn those kind of acts. I wish to speak, Honorable Chairman, in terms of sub-program 423 programs, or rather program 423, sub-programs 435 and 440 of this head, and to, which deals with disabilities, sir, and to again commend this ministry for the work it has done in advancing the lives of people with disabilities over the last 2 years with the formation and establishment of the committee of which I had the honor to chair. And to, sir, of course, with your permission, because 3 of the other members of that committee are here in our presence, sir, and since I'm speaking to them in a positive way, because I believe praise is due, they've been praised by me and others before this Parliament, but in their presence, sir, we have, as part of this ministry's effort today, the Most Honorable Kerry Ann Eiffel, FB, proud recipient of the highest national honor after National Hero in last year's independence, who was deputy chairman of that committee, sir. Senator in the other place, Andre Lee Boyce, and Ms. Janelle Odell, the first blind attorney at law in this country. Praise can never be so high for them in the efforts they made. So I want to give Minister, you and your officers, the opportunity to speak in terms of the implementation of the policy to improve the lives of persons with disability, the national policy, which was accepted and approved by Cabinet on the 21st of September last year. And give you the opportunity to inform the public, and in particular, those persons with disabilities and their caregivers through this House as to how this national policy, which is a 7-year policy, 2023 to 2030, would be implemented, sir, because the important thing now is to get what is a comprehensive policy, sir, and I have to mention to crafted with the assistance as well of Professor Drain Devenish of the University of the West Indies, but how to get this commendable comprehensive policy off of the paper into reality so that people with disabilities will see real improvement in their lives over the next 7 years. In the short term, because they're short-term goals, medium term, and long term. Thank you, Honorable Chairman.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I think I would want to, just before I speak to where we're going with the policy, to ask the Most Honorable Carrie-Ann Eiffel, who would have been Deputy Chair of that committee. First of all, let me just thank you, Honorable Member, for your sterling chairmanship of that particular committee and for the 60+ meetings you held across Barbados. But I think before I discuss what the plans are in relation to what was designed and developed by your team, I think it would be fitting for the Most Honorable Carrie-Ann Eiffel, Deputy Chair of that committee, perhaps to speak to the meetings, perhaps to speak to the process or the policy itself, but to give some further edification to the Barbadian public about the policy before I speak after about where we are and where we're going to go with it, sir.
Good morning. Sir, having served as Deputy Chair of the National Committee to Improve the Lives of Persons with Disabilities.
Officer, before you proceed, just state your name and your position for the record, just a reminder.
My name is Carrie-Ann Eiffel, and I served as Deputy Chair of the National Committee for the Improvement of Lives of Persons with Disabilities, and I'm currently consultant with the National Disabilities Unit for the Technology Services for the Blind and Visually Impaired.
You may proceed.
Sir, over the 9 months for which the committee did our work, the Minister has already spoken to the 60+ meetings, the several public engagements, the town hall meetings, the consultations, very wide consultations with the community of persons with disabilities, the work of the consultant in pulling the policy together in a timely manner. I think this committee must be commended for having delivered its mandate within the time frame it was given. That was no mean feat. Our chair set a grueling pace, setting meetings with relevant authorities. We spoke with persons from every sector of Barbadian life. We touched on all the pillars that form the backdrop to the lives of persons with disabilities. And so the eventual policy, which spans 2023 to 2030, has resulted in a document and a drafting which represents the needs and the abilities of the community of which I am proud to be a part. This policy consulted with the NGO sector extremely closely, as well as in our several town hall meetings. Some were concluded before the 9-month mandate, and then the policy, once it had been completed, was once again returned to the public for further consultation. We collected much data, largely from the community of the parents of persons with disabilities, which spoke to the need for improvements in inclusive education, housing especially, and eventual employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. The policy rolled out will address such areas, in addition to the need for improved transportation. There are several consultations still ongoing to alleviate challenges in this area. There's also representation for the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the wider digital space and our needs being addressed to this end. In addition to all of that, it was one of the first times that persons with disabilities have had so extensive an opportunity to not only air their concerns, but to bring work that has been done. We had presentations from persons who are concerned in the matter of climate change and how it impacts the lives of persons with disabilities. One of the most vigorous presentations was done from the community of persons on the autism spectrum and their caregivers as to the still ongoing challenges they face, as well as the deaf and hearing impaired community, and all other communities of persons with disabilities. The extensive policy which is represented in over 170 pages, speaks to 10 areas: access to the built environment, among others. Over the years, we've seen improvements in this area, with persons working towards a more inclusive approach to presenting their built environment. But still, it is not enough, and we still face many challenges when we seek to do our business in the wider space. It was my privilege over the time frame to sit on various panels, to engage with our fearless and tireless chair and the other persons. All 8 of us represented the community of persons with disabilities in a variety of ways. And that too is truly representative. 4 persons of the committee themselves had disabilities, and the other 4 had family members or were caregivers of persons with disabilities. Active teachers were also part of the consultation and the community. As I mentioned earlier, inclusive education is one of the areas that still remains of grave concern and is outlined and addressed clearly in the policy as to how we intend to go about achieving a new Barbados in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Nurse, the Deputy Director of the National Disabilities Unit.
All in all, being Nurse, Assistant Director, National Disabilities Unit, the national policy on disabilities is one of the achievements that we can speak about for the National Disabilities Unit. But I would like to first start with our vision statement. National Disability Unit, our vision statement is a fully inclusive Barbadian society that promotes the self-determination, dignity, and equality of all persons with disabilities in a way that empowers them to lead safe, productive, and fulfilling lives, careers, and destinies. So I can look basically at some of the areas that we focus on. Policy formulation. So which will be recommending policies and measures that ensures the protection of rights of persons with disabilities. Also focus on public awareness education, which will be sensitizing the public about issues relating to disabilities and persons with disabilities. Have campaigns about stereotypes, prejudices, harmful practices. We also focus on research and data collection. This is to ensure policies and programs are relevant and effective. Accessibility and personal disability aids and tools. The NDU promotes and monitors the accessibility of public spaces, ensuring that they are disability friendly. Not just physical infrastructure, but also information and communication systems. Provide accessibility modifications of private homes and residences of persons with disabilities. Offer a range of assistive devices and technology equipment. Focus on advocacy and collaboration. We work alongside NGOs, community-based organizations, international agencies, and so on to promote persons with disabilities. Look at skill development, recognizing the importance of economic independence, supporting vocational and skills development programs to persons with disabilities. We have a support service. NDU provides a range of support services, including counseling for persons with disabilities and their families. We can look basically at some of the achievements that we have done in the current year. But as you would have just heard, we concluded the draft national policy on persons with disabilities, concluded the draft legislation to protect the rights of persons with disabilities. In terms of some of the work we would have done, 28 ramps were constructed. We distributed 58 wheelchairs and other assisted devices. At the facilitation, we facilitated the provision of 10 prostheses to persons in need. Summer camp, the camp reached for 25 children with special needs in collaboration with the Ministry of Youth and Sports and Community Empowerment. I would just highlight some of the areas because there would have been a lot that we would have done within current year. We introduced training in flower arranging of 12 persons with disabilities who graduated in 2020. Introduced the training in sign language, and 18 persons graduated in 2020. First, $279,750 in subvention to 8 organizations. Provided information technology training for 24 visually impaired persons. Assisted 17 visually impaired persons to maneuver in their internal and external environments. We completed Barbados' first UN report to the UN Committee on the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities after signing in 2007.
All right, officer, you will complete your statement now.
Okay, so we have some major plans for the year. We were talking about in terms of employment and so on. We want to get into the AI training for persons with disabilities, and then also training in agriculture at our mangrove project. This is in collaboration with the Barbados Workers Union. We also want to increase our transportation of persons with disabilities by acquiring 3 more buses. That's basically it. Thank you.
Yes, sir, to answer the question more directly in relation to what we intend to do with the policy, sir, this policy cannot be one that sits collecting dust. In fact, government is very good at doing a lot of this kind of work and leaving it just to gather dust. There have been lots of policies, green papers, white papers, that have gone nowhere. But as you heard from the Most Honorable Karianne, I feel that a lot of work has actually gone into this policy. And it is, I think, the most representative policy, both in terms of the structure of the committee as well as the meetings and so on. So we felt it was important that this policy be brought alive in terms of, first of all, the legislation. The legislation, drafting instructions for legislation also attended the cabinet when we sent the policy. So we know legislation is coming very soon. We hope to have that legislation before Parliament by June to begin a discussion and debate on a national set of legislation, sir, that speaks to empowering and protecting persons with disabilities, sir, and their rights. In terms of the day-to-day, following up on the policy, we've asked 2 persons to assist us in that process, Ms. Janelle, permit me to say, sir, Ms. Janelle Odell and Senator Andrea Boyce, to be our advocates, but to work around making sure that the policy doesn't just become something that sits there and doesn't materialize into anything. So their day-to-day work is to make sure that the policy becomes something. We will lay that policy in Parliament and have a debate on the policy. We will also lay the report from the committee and debate that as well. So just to keep the public informed about some of these things. This, sir, that is why I am struggling, to be precise with you, to be honest, with this idea that this work could be political. I don't see how it could be. And because, you know, disabilities, don't ask your parents if you're a B or a D. You know, when you go to the bank, they don't care if you're a B or a D. If you can't get a job, they don't care if you're a B or a D. This is so above politics. I would hate, and why I've tried to keep it so far from politics, I would hate to think that we do all of this work to watch it dismantled by another administration simply because they think it's political. That's why we've kept it out of a political framework, to be able to offer real meaningful solutions to persons. And that is why we have these persons on to drive this work. So from here on in, you'll see that the committee, the 2 young persons we brought on, sir, will be making sure that the policy makes sense, that it translates into something. I also want to take this opportunity, though. I think it is common knowledge that you cannot legislate a culture. I think that is common among us in the Labour Party. There was a point during those meetings, those consultations, I would attend the meetings, and the number of stories that came out of hurt, institutional hurt and otherwise, the amount of stories that came out just of the people who were treated badly because they have a disability. So we don't need to pass laws for people to know they need to treat people well. And stories of people laughing at things that I would think that a modern society, sir, would know better. People laughing at children, people, adults in some cases, being physical with other children. We have said in the policy that we intend to put in place a quota, and that person, it's a kind of affirmative action or positive discrimination, whatever you choose to call it, whereby we're going to be asking and we're working. It's not something we're going to bring and force on the private sector, but we're working with the private sector to say, you need to hire persons with disabilities. And we had this conversation with the Ministry of Education. I know that the Minister is doing tremendous work in terms of being able to ensure that we do the testing for persons when they come into the school, to guarantee that they get the necessary treatment. One of the things that was asked of us a lot was to have people to work alongside persons with disabilities in the school setting, and to be able to do that work, to put persons with disabilities in a place where they could get employment. I began these estimates, sir, suggesting that our ministry must see itself now well above this idea that we're about a handout or even a hand up. I really feel we are at the point where we're talking about real, meaningful transformation, and that people want to take care of themselves. And so for us, it is to make sure that this policy has life, to make sure that the community feels it at the end of the day, sir, and to be able to translate these things, sir, to move people from a state where they feel like they're not respected to a point where they feel respected, where they're not allowed to contribute, to a point where they are allowed to contribute. So that is the vision, essentially. Regardless of all the fancy words and terms, that is where we want to do. Allow people to be able to live and produce like anybody else in this country. Thanks for the question, Honorable Member.
Ready? Okay. Thank you, Honorable Chairman. Honorable Minister, I note that in your sub-program 435, you are asking this Parliament to approve what is in fact a further $680,000 more to the National Disabilities Unit, totaling almost $3,300,000. That is something I would certainly support. But my second intervention here now would relate and follows on to what you said, Honorable Minister, in terms of the attitude of too many Barbadians, negative attitude towards people with disabilities. I note that in 2017, the Caribbean Development Bank, in fact, on a report on poverty in the Caribbean, mentioned that people with disabilities, not only in Barbados, but throughout the Caribbean, make up a substantial section of the poorest 5% of our population. And I wish to give you the opportunity, sir, and your team to speak towards how you are going to pursue and the formulation and implementation of a comprehensive public education and awareness campaign pertaining to the national policy, something which, as we heard from the Most Honorable Kerry-Ann, was started by the committee in terms of public outreach and education and awareness among our people, that people with disabilities are entitled, just as everyone else, to the full human and fundamental rights as citizens of this country and as residents of this country. How are we going to further this public education and awareness campaign? Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you to Honorable Member. I think public education is essential. This is so important. And we've had this conversation in the ministry. We've put some funds toward a public education program for the entire ministry to be able to do this work. Sir, I think it is going to be the case that we do this work for persons with disabilities, for the elderly, in relation to managing child abuse. I just think all of the cases under the ministry require significant public education. And so we're going to be doing that level of work. So I also feel the ministry has to, if we're saying one thing, we have to show it. You know, so we spoke about hiring persons with disabilities. We, as a ministry, we've hired several persons with disabilities. And I don't even think it is a case of us lowering our standards to hire persons with disabilities. I don't even think it should be a conversation. In fact, the contribution that is being made now by the persons we brought on is so significant that I would wish other persons would start doing it, because the quality of the community, sir, in Barbados, and their capacity to add value to organizations. This is not about us giving people handouts. It is clear to me that there is tremendous skill in the community that we are missing out on. And again, I want to use this opportunity to encourage people to come forward and to work with persons with disabilities. The PR program we had already started. You would have seen us pushing a lot of PR in relation to the parking spaces, to make sure that the parking spaces remain. But notwithstanding that, people are still parking in the parking spaces that are clearly reserved for persons with disabilities. Again, we make a call for persons, if you know you do not have a disability. The argument that is made is that, you know, when they pass there, nobody is there. But that's the point. The time that you do show up, the spot should be available for a person with disability. But we've done PR, and it hasn't resonated. Apparently, we have to continue with the PR. But I also feel that the law, when we put the law in place, Honorable Member, I think the law has to be clear, the law has to be strong, and the law has to be enforced. When all of the voluntary compliance has failed, because you don't want to start with using a heavy hand, but when all the voluntary compliance has failed, then the law has to represent persons with disabilities. The other point is, and I think the Honorable Leader of the Opposition raised it when he spoke initially about persons who use video cameras and videos to make videos of people. So I've seen several of those with persons with disabilities too. And that there is a recklessness sometimes by members not of this political party, but a recklessness sometimes of the public, sometimes to go and film persons in situations for their own purposes, you know, thinking that it is PR. It is not PR. It is not positive PR. It is discrimination. It shows the person, sir, sometimes in their most vulnerable state, sir. And I would want to say, I do not know of any case on our side where we have asked persons who are in a vulnerable position to go publicly, sir, and lower themselves for the purposes, sir, of making a political point. That is not who we are. That is not what we do. It is clear to me, however, that some persons have chosen to do it. I spoke earlier of the persons with disabilities, the two young persons that we have now taken into the ministry, sir, and are working with them to make sure that they have a decent standard of living. But then people continue to share these videos and to share, you know, there is something about the conscience of a country that at some point in time you have to have a conversation with yourself as a country. And to say that some of the things that we're doing are definitely unhealthy and need to stop. So yes, Honorable Member, you're going to see a lot of PR this year. You're going to see us pushing what's in the policy. We're going to continue to have these meetings. I hope that the public gets to know Janelle and Senator Boyce very well as our advocates over the next few weeks and months and years, so that they understand that this work, this is non-political, serious work.
Honorable Chairman, Honorable Minister, I thank you for that response. I note that in your program plans that you are proposing the identification of at least one site for the establishment of a residential facility for adults with disabilities who have no one to care for them. And I can only urge you and your management to pursue this end with alacrity. We have had situations in Barbados where because, let's say, the parent or caregiver of a person with disability, adult person with disability, dies, that person with disability ends up in the psychiatric hospital without having any mental or psychological or psychiatric issues, sir. And that, quite honestly and clearly, is a breach of their constitutional rights. So this proposed program is very much needed, residential facilities for those adult persons with disabilities in that position. You mentioned, Honorable Minister, of the issue of parking spaces for persons with disabilities. We commend, or I speak for myself, sir, I commend the Ministry of Transport and in association with your ministry, sir, for the first time putting parking spaces in Bridgetown in May 2022. I believe there are 5 or 6 parking spaces now. There need to be more, but at least that was a start after the stakeholders in disabilities signed a petition and presented it to the then Prime Minister way back in 2015. So I think that petition had over 10,000 signatories. Mine was one for parking spaces, public parking spaces for persons with disabilities in the city and in other key areas. The issue of the fine, sir, the fine is only $500 for parking in a parking space reserved for people with disabilities where you are not driving a person with disabilities, more applicably where there isn't such a sticker on your car identifying your vehicle as one that carries persons with disabilities, sir. This fine needs to be increased. I've spoken with the Honorable Minister for Public Works on this issue, and we agreed that I should write her on that, which I'm going to shortly do. I believe, sir, it will get support on the other side too, from speaking with the former members of this Parliament who were at cabinet level when that legislative provision was brought into effect. And I told them $500 was too low. They have now come to realize that it is. So there should be no opposition to an increase in that fine to a good $5,000 I would want to propose. But I wish to give you, Honorable Minister, the opportunity. You mentioned the draft Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill, and I note you said you would like it before this Parliament by the end of this calendar year. But that draft bill, and that was assisted in being crafted by Dr. Jason Haynes, a brilliant Caribbean person who was at the time lecturing at our university, the West Indies Law Faculty. But that draft bill speaks on every aspect of the lives of persons with disabilities, in fact, of people. Health, employment, education, and I suppose coincidentally, we're in the midst of education reform, and the Honorable Member, the Honorable Minister of Education knows that I reach out to her very often on this issue as to taking disabilities education out, and let's see what we can do right now in the short term. Let's wait for the full educational transformation, how we can improve the education of children with disabilities right away. And Minister, you're aware, and the Honorable Minister of Education, that UN agencies and now the European Union have said that they are willing in principle to provide technical and perhaps financial assistance in this regard to us. But Honorable Minister, if you could speak a bit more in terms of the draft legislative provisions on health, employment, and education. These are the 3 key areas. The most Honorable Kerry-Ann Eiffel and Ms. Janelle Odell often say being a person with disabilities is an expensive exercise in terms of health. We know that the housing policy of providing 10% housing, state housing or state-funded or assisted housing for persons with disabilities is already in place, as the Honorable Minister for Housing would say, and is being implemented certainly in the housing development that was opened a few months ago in White Park. That 10% allocation to persons with disabilities as a policy of housing enshrined in the draft policy was implemented, sir. But if Honorable Minister, you could speak a bit more under those three issues, which are so important to persons with disabilities: health, employment, and education, in terms of what's in the draft Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill. Thank you, Honorable Chairman.